All right. Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Brittany Martinez, and I'm a TL1 postdoctoral fellow at the University of Kansas Medical Center in the Department of Cell Biology and Physiology. And very broadly, I research ways to prevent structural birth defects. I also serve as one of the national T representatives for the CTSA Executive Director Council. And Jason is my counterpart, so he's going to introduce himself, and then we'll discuss why we're here, and then we'll get into
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Hatfield. I'm one of the other national T representative for CTSA execs. I'm the pre-doc representative. I'm a fourth year doctoral candidate based at the University of Minnesota in the Comparative and Molecular Biosciences program. And I research focuses on finding safer and more effective ways to control airborne viruses like avian and human metapneumoviruses by using a form of UV light called far UVC light, which is a safe form of UV light. So it can't hurt our eyes or our skin, but it can still kill pathogens. So I study how we can combat virus uh, spread, and then I work with farmers and doctors, and I try and apply this to actual real world settings to apply this science um, to the world. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so Jason and I started our appointment for the CTSA Executive Council about in March, and about 3 months after that, in one of the meetings, they sort of tasked us with engaging more with our national cohort of T trainees. And as a result, Jason and I came up with a fall and spring workshop over topics that we thought may be interesting to our fellow T trainees. And we didn't want to limit this to just specifically T trainees. So we have shared this with a broader audience. So today we will cover AI ethics. And then in the spring, we will cover science communication. The date is not set yet, but we will send out information as soon as we have it. So we are very excited to hear from our panelists today, both Dr. Beth Thielen and Dr. Holly Zink. There's one housekeeping item that we need to discuss due to the government shutdown. Dr. Resnick will be unable to join us today. We are hopeful that once things are up and going again, we will reach out to him and send him these questions and see if he'll give us his insight, and then we can share that with everyone. Also, this is being recorded, and we will share the recording with you, and you can feel free to share the recording with anyone that you feel would be interested. Okay, so Holly and Beth, if you can introduce yourselves, and then when we're done, we'll start with questions.
You want to go first, Beth?
Sure. Okay. So I'm Beth Thielen. I'm a physician scientist at University of Minnesota. So I both practice medicine and I'm trained in adult and pediatric infectious diseases, and I see mostly hospitalized children with infectious diseases, my clinical practice. And then I lead a wet lab and a translational slash bench lab, trying to understand the reasons that we see heterogeneity of presentations with common respiratory tract infections. So we mostly work in viruses with things like flu and respiratory syncytial virus, but try to broadly incorporate elements of assessing human genetic variation and microbiome variation, and then sort of genomic changes in the pathogens of interest. And I would say related to this talk, I also was recently a participant in the AIM Ahead NCATS cohort. So that's the Artificial Intelligence Machine Learning Consortium to advance health equity and researcher diversity through NIH. And specifically the NCATS group is the National Center for Advancing Translational Science. And so really looking at using clinical data and electronic health around the country to try to use AI and machine learning approaches to sort of draw conclusions from large data sets of clinical data. I will over to you, Holly.
So, hi, Dr. Holly Zink. I'm excited to be here today. So, I serve as the director of our career development and training programs at the Frontiers Clinical and Translational Science Institute. I'm assistant professor in the Department of Population Health at the University of Kansas Medical Center, and I also serve as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Research Administration. So I typically work kind of where science, strategy, and education overlap. So I'm helping kind of early career researchers learn not just how to do great science, but how to kind of shape those systems and those teams and those tools to really make that great science possible. So in that spirit, I consider myself to be kind of a pragmatic optimist about AI. So I'm someone who believes that these tools can really enhance our human judgment and not replace it, as long as we're using them kind of transparently and thoughtfully. So excited to be here today.
Thank you both for being here. Okay, so we'll just start with the questions. And then for everyone in the audience, we're going to go through the questions that we have set up for Holly and Beth. And then if there's time at the end, we will do a Q&A. Okay, so we're going to start with Beth. Many of us use AI tools like ChatGPT or image analysis software daily. What are some ethical considerations we might overlook in routine use?
Well, thanks for that. I've made a few notes of things, but I'm probably others on this call could jump in as well. I think, particularly in the lens of trainees, I think making sure that we're thinking about where the underlying data is coming from and whether that's representative of the problems that we are interested in. And so, speaking specifically from my experience recently in the clinical space, using data in electronic health records may not be representative of a lot of the variables that we care about as people making new discoveries. And so I think, thinking about part of as trainees, part of what we're doing is trying to drive the field forward and ask questions about things that aren't known about or exist. And so, not limiting yourself to things that maybe have already exist in data sets may impair the ability to kind of think about some of those new areas. So I think the other related to that, I think thinking about biases in the types of data, like systematic biases in the types of data that we have. And so particularly, are we representing populations in terms of gender, racial diversity, geographic location, urban, rural, educational attainment? There's all these types of factors, and I think there's lots of reasons why not all of that diversity is always represented in existing data sets. And so there's some limitations there. A couple of resources that I think were helpful in kind of thinking about this is there's a nice documentary called Coded Bias that talks about some of these challenges. And then I just also recently read a book called Weapons of Math Destruction, which is kind of delves into more of these details. And so I think for people, scientists thinking about this emerging area, I think doing some reading is helpful. And then at our institution, we had a journal club recently around the book AI Snake Oil. So I think people are writing discussions and kind of teasing apart some of these things. So I think availing yourself of some of those resources is nice. I would also add, something that just came up in our clinical discussion is around the environmental impacts of running the computer infrastructure to run these. And so I think that maybe is along the lines of things we don't always think about, but is starting to come up in some of the discussion.
Thank you. Holly, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that kind of in all of those amazing resources that you mentioned, Beth, too, is it's coming back to kind of slowing down and reflecting on that use. So I think one of the biggest risks that we have isn't this like dramatic misuse as much as it is just normalizing without reflection first. So if we're just treating AI as kind of this invisible background noise, or if it's a tool we're using every single day, we might stop asking questions about data sources and privacy and transparency and some of those maybe seemingly harmless prompts like summarize these meeting notes or reformat this data then might create some chains of accountability that we don't always see all the way through. So I would just say, AI tools daily, ethical AI use isn't just about just about what we do with it. It's about kind of what happens to our data after we do, right? So, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we'll move on to your question then. Okay, so it's going to be on grant writing. So where is AI genuinely helpful in proposal development, and where is the ethical line?
So AI can be an incredible partner in the grant writing process. It helps us clarify aims. It can help tighten language. It can help reorganize text, right, to match funder criteria if you're switching over funders. It can help translate some of those really complex ideas for your various different reviewers. But those are all tasks of refinement, not invention. So I think the ethical line really appears when AI starts creating your science rather than supporting its communication, right? So if it's generating hypotheses, if it's generating methods or references that you did not author yourself. So I always say that AI should help you sound like the best version of yourself, not someone else entirely. So using AI that way, especially in grant writing, aligns with kind of these emerging standards that we have right now for AI transparency, right? We're emphasizing accountability, reproducibility, and always human oversight. When you're using AI tools, especially in grant writing, best practice is to document the model version and purpose of why you're using it, just like you would write down the analytics software that you use in your methods, right? Transparency signals trustworthiness is something I like to say too. So, and one more thing about grant writing, the most effective prompts, and I think we're going to talk about this later too, but the most effective prompts are clear and purpose-driven. So rephrase this paragraph to improve clarity for NIH reviewers while retaining all scientific content, something like that, right? So being careful when you're grant writing, it's helping you be the best version of yourself. It's not necessarily creating a brand new hypotheses or methods or references. Beth, do you have anything?
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts as you were talking about the versions and models. I mean, I think I've been using versions of ChatGPT, and I've seen the changes over time. And I just did this for a biography. I just asked it somebody I was writing drafting a letter of support for, and I said, summarize this. I just wanted to find out what it did. I said, summarize this person's career, and it actually is better now because it'll give some citations of like where it's finding the data, which I think is nice, and it didn't used to do that. It also put up 3 different pictures, one of which was the actual individual, and 2 are which other people with a similar name. So I think I think it's very just trying it out. It was something where you actually know the underlying material and see how it does. I think is very instructive to kind of figure out what it may be good at and where you need to exert a little extra oversight on fact checking. And I completely agree with the comments about those very specific instructions. It's like, cutting words, formatting tone, reducing redundancy. Those are some of the things where it's sort of copy editing, which I find it more helpful for.
Well, happy to know what I've been using ChatGPT for is okay, because I've been doing basically what y'all have been saying. So that's good news. Okay, so this next question is for both of you. And it's going to be, what distinguishes ethical use of AI from merely effective or efficient use in scientific research? And I think we've kind of just talked about that, but if there's anything else you want to add to, again, what makes it effective and efficient versus it's an ethical consideration. Beth, you want to go first? Or Holly, go ahead.
So,
whoever.
Efficiency is about saving time. Ethics is about safeguarding trust, right? So you can use AI to make your work faster or cleaner, but ethical use means that you're keeping that human accountability at the center. So I love a good workflow. I love good workflows. An efficient workflow automates. An ethical workflow illuminates, right? It clarifies your decision points, it documents your rationale, it discloses AI involvement, right? So effective AI makes us more productive. Ethical AI makes us a little bit maybe more responsible. So, and I'll say too that ethical use often means you have to slow down right at the moment when AI tempts you to speed up, right? It does something really exciting and you're like, oh, I'm done. No, take time to verify, reflect, and then disclose. So I will say that just slow down. AI often prompts you to get excited, you need to slow down for just a moment.
Thank you. Okay, Beth, your take on difference in what distinguishes it from an ethical use to effective or efficient?
Yeah, I mean, I think one specific example I'm thinking about is attributing sources and sort of giving credit for intellectual thinking. And I think the efficient thing is you create something and it pieces it together from stuff it finds on the internet, and it doesn't attribute that to where specifically it came from. And I kind of think of it as if people have pre-AI were thinking about going to a review article and sort of seeing somebody's take versus like going to the primary sources and sort of synthesizing that. And how I approach it is I read the review article, kind of get the lay of the land, and then there's things where it actually is relevant. I'm going to go back to the primary sources and figure out where it came from and whether I agree with the interpretation in light of what we know now. And that's sort of how I use AI. During the pandemic, I was involved in co-teaching a class and sort of helping medical students correct misinformation. And one of the concepts that came out is this idea of lateral reading. So you read something and then you're like, I don't know about that. Let me go search an independent site and find that, and then determine whether it checks out. And I think thinking about that in AI is like, it says something. Can I then go back and figure out where that came from and verify that in fact it's pulling at something from a reputable source and that its interpretation of that source is something that I agree with.
Yeah, it's always interesting, right? It's like, but because I think it's gotten better. In the beginning, it was like the sources are just, they don't exist, or it's just like so ridiculous. And even in the last 6 months, it's actually gotten better at pulling real sources. So, again, it goes back to the double checking. Like you can't just take it at its word, because you just can't, because then you're likely to be wrong. So I think, and again, back to what Holly's saying, you have to engage with it. You can't just let it do it for you and then you move on. You have to engage and make sure it's true and it's still saying everything you want it to. So yeah, I agree with both of you. Okay, Holly, how can AI assist with reporting and communications without risking confidentiality?
Yeah, so one of my roles is program management. I have 3, 4, 5 different programs that I run. And I want to say that kind of reporting, it's really useful to use AI when you're looking at that reporting within my programs, but it's also the most kind of ethically sensitive portion for me. So I tell my team here in the main office, if you wouldn't email it to a stranger, don't paste it into the public AI tool. So AI can help generate and summarize meeting notes. It can help analyze anonymized survey trends. It can help generate draft reports, right? But with anything that's, kind of personally identifiable or unpublished data, that belongs only in secure institutional systems. And every kind of institution has their own processes and software available for that. But I think that to the main question, ethical AI use in administration, when I'm wearing that hat, it requires kind of both that transparency and data stewardship, right? These aren't just policies we're following, right? It's not the KU policy that I'm following. This is a cultural commitment to sustain that trust in research. And I think we can all agree that sustaining trust in research is a core principle for all of us right now, right? And so understanding the type of task that the AI system is performing. Is it generating? Is it analyzing? Is it predicting? And then that helps us determine how much human oversight is then needed based on the task that we've asked it to do. But I think, human accountability always remains at the center of everything we do with AI. And going back to kind of citing, I do have 2 references that I'm going to drop in the chat for you guys. These are 2 different resources. So one is kind of a taxonomy of 16 different categories of AI activity, but the second one will take you to kind of that delegation, not authorship. So which tasks at which phases were delegated to AI, and you kind of see how they use that as well. So I love kind of looking at those two resources when I'm kind of thinking about reporting and communicating without really risking that confidentiality.
I kind of have a question, but Beth,
Yeah.
go ahead, and then I'll.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to specifically bring up like this, the idea of security and not emailing it to a stranger. I will say, just so people are aware, there is movement of thinking about secure spaces to use some of this in the clinical space. And so this is not meant to be an endorsement of any particular product, but just like our health system just went live with an AI scribe that's integrated into our electronic health record. And so that is sort of the a secure equivalent where it's meant to be, it's recording, and just people know this is coming out there. It is recording patient encounters and then summarizing it in a note template form from the listen to conversation. I think the consent
We have
part,
that as well, Beth.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the consent part is, I think is something that we're sort of working out is what, as we're explaining to patients in these encounters, what do people understand about what this is happening, and are they in agreement with this, this going on? And so I think that is something we're having ongoing dialogue about how we're going to have that consent piece of it. But I think this is going to be something that's going to come into the secure environment, or we'll see that more and more. But I think just keeping in mind what kind of data you're working with. And I would say sometimes as a clinical person, I get protocols sent confidentiality for me to review that's not meant to go out there. So like that's not something I'm gonna put into chat, that 100-page protocol and say summarize this for me, because that is, again, that's an example of like releasing something that is not meant to be shared.
Yeah,
I think
that was
that
kind of. Oh, go ahead.
I think I'd underscore too that privacy and consent don't end once that data becomes de-identified. So some AI models, especially those that might be further integrated into things, can often re-identify through pattern recognition. So I think it's important to note too that our ethical duty is to think beyond compliance and towards that broader context and consequence as well. So yeah.
And
Yeah,
I think I think increasingly as sequencing is becoming more a part of what we're doing, I think human genomic data in these data sets is something I think to be really, really thoughtful of. And something we've been grappling with is like where we store that data, because it is in some sense genetic markers are potentially identifiable, as like we hear in these stories about identifying people involved with crimes based on family member relatedness. And so I think thinking very broadly about what is private data and what is identifiable, and particularly in the context of being able to do these analyses of these large scale data sets, I think that is going to sort of expand what we think of as identifiable data, not just the sort of standard HIPAA defined elements, but I think thinking more broadly.
So that's sort of what my question was going to get to, is like, so if we think about everyone that's doing very clinical research and you drop your AIMS page and say, hey, help me do whatever it is that okay? Or would we need to use them? Could you use AI Scribe for that? Or is it only going to take notes? Like if you wanted it to work on the AIMS page with very clinical data, would that be okay? Secondly, is there one that would be better for that?
I don't know. Clarify your question for me, Brittany. Are you dropping clinical data into the chat, or are you dropping your AIMS page into the chat asking for assistance with the AIMS page?
AIMS page. But it may have something in the AIMS page in the intro that's confidential. I'm just hypothesizing. I don't know. I don't do clinical research.
I don't typically see confidential information in an AIMS page just because sometimes those are the most widely distributed. But I would black that out, or I would put in X's where the numbers are, or anonymize it in some way. There are ways to use the chat to help tighten your language and get that AIMS page where you need it to be without breaking that confidentiality. And so that's how I would attack that.
Okay. That's good. Because I think, if you're trying to use it for that, but you may have something in there, there's a line there, like, should we use it? And I think that's really good advice to say, well, let's just block out the numbers rather than not put it in at all. Okay, Beth. Do you think there should be formal guidelines or training on AI ethics as part of graduate or postdoctoral education?
So I think I think this should be formally discussed, but I'm a little bit hesitant about sort of guidelines and how we implement guidelines and training. Because I think, this is a new area and I think it's a very rapidly evolving area. And I think my worry is that we think of this as there's a few people who put together a curriculum or a guideline and then that's where it stays. And I think this is a field that's going to need really ongoing revision with quite a bit of rapidity. And I think in a sense, crowdsourcing what we think of the ethical standards are is something that like I think we all are sort of should be involved in thinking about. And I think also thinking about the hierarchies that exist in academia, perhaps people who are more, it's good to have people across a spectrum of lived experiences sort of weighing in on those practices. And I think sometimes there's a tendency that they're sort of positions come down from on high that don't always address the needs. And I think when it feels like guidelines or trainings aren't addressing the needs that are out there, then there's a tendency perhaps to work around them rather than sort of say, how do we change the guidelines so that they're both workable and an ethical framework that we can agree to? So I would say, I think thinking about it as maybe panels or groups with broad representation across academic interests would be, I think, the approach that I would take. And really, I think thinking about it in terms of I think we haven't talked about educational value, and I think a couple of things that I'll just bring up right now. I think teaching coding it's really, really helpful for, draft some code that you can then, start from and edit. I think finding misplaced, commas, parentheses, things like that is something that AI is pretty good at. It knows the rules of writing in Python or R or whatever, and is good at finding, debugging potentially. So, and then I think, facilitating active reading. So something I'll do a lot is, I'm reading a topic that I maybe don't know a lot about. I'll come across terminology that I don't know, and I just ask, ChatGPT, like, define this for me. Tell me a little bit more about this. And I think teaching some of those strategies of like you incorporating it into a different learning teaching model is something that I think can have a lot of value. And so I think, yes, we should be thinking about this as part of our spelled out guidelines and training. And I think thinking more about who has a seat at the table for defining those should be pretty broad.
Thank you. Holly, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tool. We're scientists. Of course, we want to use a bright, new, shiny tool that's going to help us do what we want to do. But it's not just kind of how to use the tool, but how to question it. I think it comes back to that reflective practice, that reflective fluency, right? The ability to understand the bias it has, how to verify the accuracy, how to disclose when we used it, but then also just how to use it so that it's making our workflows easier, it's making our work easier so that we can focus on kind of the hard science and the things that require human brain and human thought to really move, whatever your research agenda is forward. So I'll say yes, there should be, this kind of focus on using it throughout our practice, but including that reflective practice as we go through. I mean, my second grader is doing PowerPoint presentations, right? Technology is part of education at every level. It's just understanding how to use it and working in that reflective mindset of this is a tool and this is how to use it even as it grows.
I've heard it a lot mentioned that like it's specifically wording is it's a tool, not a crutch. So like don't rely on it, right? But like use it effectively. And I really like how simple that is, but like it really applies to what you're saying.
I'd love to hear more about the second grade PowerPoint sometime. I bet it's good. Okay, we're going to move on to manuscripts now with Holly. And so I think you sort of talked about it a little bit already, but what is the right way to disclose AI assistance in the paper? Does it need to be cited, essentially?
Yeah, so I'm going to drop a great resource in the chat. So this is one of the most common questions that I get. I personally use AI as kind of a copy editor, not an author, right? It's great for improving clarity of thought, grammar, organization, but it should never generate scientific content, interpret data, or create citations. Yes, it's getting better at that, but it's still not great. So most journals now require some sort of disclosure statement like, portions of this manuscript were refined for clarity using ChatGPT version blah, 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 blah. All text was reviewed and verified by authors. There are some journals that are requesting a formal reference, so you would cite it like you would cite a software, right? So it depends on the journal. Always check journal requirements. Always check, your target journal requirements from the very beginning of a project, which is one of my pet peeves, right? Before you even start really writing that manuscript, select your target journal and really get down to the requirements of what they have. Because if their requirements are no AI whatsoever, you need to know that up front before you use it in your paper, and then you find it out at the end, then you have to find a new target journal, right? So look at your target journal several times over, right? Policies are changing very quickly and updating quickly as new tools get released. So check your target journals. If you are, one of the practices that I do when I'm writing an article is find other papers like mine that have been published recently and use those as model papers for how the editorial board wants to see that final draft submission. Know that policies may have changed since that paper you're using as a model paper has happened, so always double check that. And then I'm just a big proponent, of documenting your AI use. I've dropped a tool in the chat that's really helpful for, I used it for this, and it spits out something you can just copy and paste into your manuscript, right? It's a tool. What tool did you use? What version? And what purpose you used it for? It just supports reproducibility and transparency, and those are really big key themes for the NIH at the moment. I would just say, final advice, think of AI as part of your methods, right? You wouldn't omit your analysis software. You don't omit your AI workflow, right? It's part of how you did what you did. So I don't know if Beth has anything else to add. Yep.
Beth, do you have anything there, or did she cover it?
I agree with all those points. And I didn't necessarily have some of these resources for actually draft it. I mean, I'm thinking these are the things I should say, but it is really helpful to have those specific examples to help kind of craft and address the individual points.
And we will be sending all of these tools out to everybody at the end, so everybody has them. Okay, Beth, when using AI to analyze human or animal data, what are our ethical responsibilities about privacy and informed consent? I think we kind of covered this already. But if there's anything else you want to add, if not, we can go to the next one.
No, I think
you that think we got it.
I think it's just to say, basically anything that's potentially attributable to an individual human person, that this is just keep this off in general off these sort of public facing places.
Okay, Holly, anything else, or you think we got that one down?
Yeah, we've touched on it quite a bit. Just context and consequence, right? Of kind of pattern recognition and identifying what was de-identified. So
okay. So back to Holly now. What makes a good ethical prompt for scientific content?
I think, kind of going back to education, I think there should be a class on how to generate a good prompt. I think prompting and writing a good prompt is in and of itself a skill that requires kind of trial and error to really get there. So prompting is kind of where you're talking about ethics while effectiveness. Those are where kind of those two things meet, really nail down into the prompt that you enter into the chat. So a good prompt is something that's defining the context, it's defining the goal of what you want at the end, and you're also introducing guardrails into the conversation, right? So poor prompts lead to poor results, but then also possibly ethically ambiguous results. AI mirrors your thinking. If you're vague, it's vague. If you're precise, it can become an extension of your precision, right? So a strong prompt, let me think about it. So you are editing for NIH reviewer audience. Rewrite this paragraph for clarity and flow, preserving all scientific meaning and all numerical values. Do not create or modify citations, right? Something along those lines. And then if what it spits out isn't what I wanted, don't continue the conversation. Go back and edit your prompt and then edit that prompt continuously until you get what you want. Then write, another chat on the end. Don't continue the conversation and say, no, that was wrong. Please try this, and then get something else. Don't try to continue the conversation. Go back and revise that prompt. And that's really going to help kind of prevent hallucinations. It's going to improve reproducibility. It's going to improve the whole context of the flow of that chat. You're also kind of teaching the AI tool, too, about you and your project and what you're looking for as you write that through. So I think if you use it in that way, AI can really become a partner, like a reflective partner with you as you're writing, and it can help just work through all those goals and work through, whatever goal you have that you're using it for. And it's not replacing your human reasoning either at that point. But I think that prompting is something we could all use a little education on. But I think that's my number one tip is don't just continue the conversation. Go back and edit that original prompt until you're getting what you want.
Thank you. Beth, anything there?
Well, I just really want to second that point about not continuing the conversation. I like the way you said that a lot, because that's sort of what I've discovered through trial and error as well, is that if it didn't start out in a good place, giving it just more to build on, usually it's just a downward spiral. I think it's going back to the very beginning and prompt engineering, I think is the in term, but like re-engineer your prompt.
Good. So one final question from us, then we'll open it up to the audience. So this is for Beth. What emerging ethical challenges in AI should trainees be aware of as they design future research projects?
So I think one thing I would say is that what is available to a lot of, at least today in the models, is not necessarily always the most up to date in terms of the state of the science. And so I think here it's not going to replace going to talks and hearing people present unpublished data that may or may not be out there. I think having conversations, and so I think just being aware that if you're basing your project ideas based on what ChatGPT is going to come up with, it may not be the most sort of innovative stuff addressing the needs of the day.
So I think it goes back to, again, re-engaging with it. Don't let it drive everything. You can ask it to do things, but still be engaged with your material and make sure it is up to date. Okay, Holly, any quick thoughts there?
Yeah, we've talked about bias and bias amplification. We've talked about hallucinations. We've talked about data provenance. Those are big risks. I'll also add intellectual property, but my PhD is in business strategy and innovation, so I'm always thinking about intellectual property. But again, the goal isn't to master every risk. There's always going to be risks. There's going to be new versions. Things are going to be changing. But then, I'll say it again, just making that reflection, that ethical reflection part of the routine when you're working with AI and you're working with project design. So,
thank you. Okay, so we will move on, and Jason's going to take over for the Q&A portion.
Awesome. So yes, anyone has any questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat. If you want to be more private, you can send it directly to me as well. We already have one question that was sent anonymously. But if you have any other ones, please ask. Otherwise, we have a couple other questions we can always ask for you, but love to hear from you guys as well. So the question I got is it appropriate to use AI to assist with peer reviews of manuscripts? I will be the first to admit that after reading through and providing my feedback on a manuscript review, I used AI to review it as well, and it actually caught some errors that I didn't see. It also suggested some edits that would actually improve the manuscript and provided other suggestions that were not relevant. Ultimately, I picked out the suggestions that were appropriate and integrated them into my peer review. Is this appropriate or not?
So I'll take this one. That's an important question, timely question. I think everyone and every journal and every editorial board is wrestling with that right now.
Mhm.
As an editor, I'd say AI can assist with the process of review, but it should never replace the judgment of a reviewer, right? That's the purpose of peer review. I want the judgment of the peer reviewer. I think it's helpful to organize thoughts, summarize key points, check grammar, if it's done transparently and the confidentiality of the manuscript is protected. But, and it goes back to what I just said, manuscripts are under review. They are confidential intellectual property. So uploading them into a public AI system like ChatGPT violates that confidentiality because the text is not yours to share. So most journals, including mine at the Journal of Research Administration, we're moving towards kind of those clear policies for our editorial boards and our reviewers. It prohibits sharing manuscripts with public AI models. It encourages reviewers to disclose if AI-assisted tools like grammar checks were used in private or local environments, even if it's local to your university. And we're reiterating that accountability remains fully human. You as a reviewer, you the human, is responsible. So I tell my editorial board, AI can help you sharpen your insight, but it can't shoulder the responsibility of your peer review. So if a reviewer uses AI, that should be disclosed to the editor privately in the reviewer comments. You can have a note to the editor. There's usually a box, when you're completing the review. This review is composed with limited assistance from an AI-based writing tool to improve readability. All judgments that I'm listing here, whatever those are the reviewer's own thing. AI should not replace the art of peer review. It should make it more thoughtful and more clear. I'll pop kind of one more thing in the chat. That's COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. They have outstanding guidelines as far as the use of AI tools in peer review and just within the editorial process in general. So again, I'll go back to kind of that transparency builds trust in the process, right? Without discouraging innovation. I don't want to discourage innovation. I love innovation. Let's do it. But let's, be reflective and careful with that. And it goes back to manuscripts under review are confidential intellectual property. So there's a line there.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think it's a really good and important question that we should be thinking about and discussing. And I guess one higher level point I want to have is that we feel like we're creating an environment where we can discuss these things openly rather than people feeling like this is not something that we, is okay to discuss. I think, the point which I would say, in summarizing where Holly is talking is it you're feeding the manuscript, the submitted manuscript to AI versus are you getting help in making your comments understandable? And I think those are those sort of two big buckets there. It's like reviewing the primary text that is confidential versus your comments about it that probably is not. And I guess I would sort of think of that as like, the Ames page, or sort of like you just put in a bunch of your unpublished, data versus you submitted the Ames page. It's sort of an aggregate process of that. So I guess making those distinctions, that probably the former is problematic because you're sharing something that's confidential versus like your comments you're getting, it's like fancy spell check or something for your document, I guess. And then just a comment about where data is being stored and ways to grapple with some of this. So in the aim ahead, we talked about, systems where multiple clinical sites are submitting data centrally, and that the data is then sort of accessible to everybody in the network, versus using these like federated systems where people are sharing like models and code and things, but the actual primary data is stored locally and protected from external environments. And so I think there is some nuance to thinking about where is the data going and with whom is it being shared, to think about it like moving forward of how might we leverage some of the strengths of the tools without risking the data privacy part of it. So there's not a uniform answer there, but just like considerations to think about.
Awesome. Thank you both.
You made
Anyone?
me think too, Beth, real quick, sorry. You made me think too, Beth, that if you're as a reviewer, you can also, and I've done this before too, I'll write the first draft of my review for the author, and then it's maybe a little mean, and so I'll send that through, and I'll say adjust the tone to be a little more friendly, and that's reciprocal too if you are on the receiving end of reviewer 2 comments that are a little harsh. Feed it in, say, please make this a little more friendly and happy, and then, that's a good mental health exercise for you as you work through revising your manuscript, So there are ways to use it in peer review that could be helpful, if not mentally healthy.
I think that's a really good thing. There's
a
three
really
of
good
us
point.
in this. There's 3 of us in the room listening, and everybody's like excited that you said that. I think that's really.
Yeah.
I will do that next time reviewer 2 says anything, and I have to admit I tend to be reviewer 2, so maybe I'll do that for somebody.
Have it add
You're the bad guy.
emojis, and then all of a sudden it's a happy experience reworking your entire manuscript.
Maybe we're about to change reviewer 2's whole profile.
Yep.
Personality.
It's toxic positivity. It's not even. Anyone else in the chat have any questions? Please type them out. I believe everyone should be muted besides us. But I will ask a question I have burning in my head. We talked a lot today about, peer review and everything else. I want to talk a little bit broader scope for a second about, the environmental impact of AI and how we can approach that, justify that, and talk about that in a good way with STEM. Right, STEM is already very famous for having a lot of plastic waste. We go through a lot of materials. Individual research might not be environmentally friendly, but what we're doing is environmentally friendly for the whole. But obviously, using something as environmentally detrimental, potentially as AI, how do we justify using that with our STEM, and how do you guys approach that? And then that thought process, what can we potentially do or talk about or, discuss to make it maybe better, or, yeah, you know what I mean? Holly, if you'd like to go first, or Beth, whichever
Sure.
one.
Yeah, I think it comes back to awareness of what it takes. I would love to see, as with most things, right? We as human beings will do one tiny little thing and we won't realize the ripple effect that happens because of that one thing. So even small reminders like this chat that you just entered today took X, Y, and Z to make it happen. And just being aware of that. And then that shapes how we use the tool, right? Is it a water bottle that I carry with me? I don't care if it gets hurt. I can go buy another one for, $5 wherever next. Or is it, this is a luxury item in that I want to be careful about how and when and how often I use it and what I use it for. And it's not necessarily every single moment I'm on it constantly for tiny little things. This is a tool that I use for these larger things because of the cost that it's going to have on the population as a whole, the climate, etc. So I think those larger conversations are always important to kind of keep front of mind as we start introducing new tools that are so not necessarily addictive, but can be used in so many broad ways by everyone. And yeah, just being
Yeah,
thoughtful.
I'm not trying to guilt individuals here. It's more like how do we address this as a science community as well, right? Because it's the same thing with big businesses and everything else are actually causing most of pollution. What can we do to change it, and what can we discuss within our field itself? But I love that answer. Beth, do you have any more to add?
And I think this is maybe a larger point that I would say about scientists being involved policy discourse. And, I think we're knowledgeable experts in a lot of these areas. And I think seeing that as part of our larger role is to advocate for wise policies and get that expertise into the discussions around this, and whether it's like what regulation is going to be existing on the companies that do this, and what are they expected to contribute to their responsibility to mitigate environmental impacts that they may have in power use and things like that. And I think having this kind of discourse where we have a lot of people looking at this problem from different perspectives and bringing these issues in. I think to your point, Jason, about scientific waste, I think it is often grad students and postdocs working in labs who are saying, we're using all of this plastic and we're not recycling, and can we do better? And I think it's going to be people being in the room to ask those questions, to say, how can we do better? And what are the places we can make these systems more efficient and mitigate impact? And then I would say there's a lot of data generation that's happened as a part of science. And I think secondary analyses where you're not redoing all of the experiments, I think can yield lots of important insights. And so I think of it not just as wasting resources in the analysis, but potentially getting more use out of data sets that people have already spent a lot of money and time and patient contributions to generate. So I think there's pluses and minuses, and I just think approaching it from a very holistic way and saying, sort of encompassing downstream, upstream, what are the potential unintended consequences at all levels, I think is really important.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much.
I
Um,
love one thing. I love
yeah.
what you said, Beth, about policy. The most powerful way to influence policy is to really model transparency and really invite that dialogue, right? Policy shouldn't be written just by IT or compliance or legislator, right? They need input from us. They need input from working scientists who understand that data, who understand that impact. And so it's not going to be a static rule book, right? We've talked about guidelines. We've talked about, it's not going to be static. It's a community of practice. And that's going to be experimenting thoughtfully and sharing what works and what the cost is to make it work, and helping, the field as a whole evolve responsibly. So.
Thank you both. We have one final question. Before that, I just want to make some quick announcements. I know people might be dipping out, and I want to make those announcements before more people potentially dip out. Uh, just a couple things. If you guys are liking kind of what we're doing as the T representatives, please know that if you're in your first year, you can apply for it. We'll be sending that out later this year, probably closer to like Thanksgiving, Christmas time. Um, and we do a lot to talk with the CTSI lead executives. We are literally on the executive committee. We talk to them and we try and tell them what you as the student want to do. So if you're interested in doing something like this as a first year, please apply when we send that out. We'd love to talk with you. Brittany and I go over those, and we work through that. We really aim to make this more student-led. So we're doing these kind of things, and we have these kind of presentations, and we are trying to get your voices in on these topics. This was voted on by, we sent out a survey to several different hubs, and this was the single most voted topic. So I hope you guys are really enjoying it today. And finally, we will be sending out a short survey. I promise I made it as short as I possibly can. I'll go either tonight or tomorrow. Please fill that out so we have your feedback so we can make this experience better for all of you. Now, with that being said, thank you again. And we have one final question, and then we'll wrap it up from there. Where do you think the line is in terms of utilizing AI for tonal meaning of human words? Following up on that question from earlier, I feel like we're heading towards a point where a lot of communication will have a chatbot to chatbot interface, which I feel may dilute original human voice. This question is coupled with the concern for potential negative effects, like recently in the news from the kid that was encouraged to end his life by chatbot.
I'll say that human authenticity is maybe an ethical cornerstone in AI. So use AI as a coach, not a ghostwriter. It can help you sound polished, but it can't and shouldn't impersonate your personal professional voice. Um, there is that risk of deceit, but there's also just kind of, when I think about your question, it's uniformity. Everybody sounds exactly the same, right? If it's chatbots talking to chatbots, talking to chatbots. And I think the thing that counteracts that is your personal authenticity is your advantage, right? I am an extremely optimistic person. You can tell if I wrote that email because I'm like, woo, good morning, happy Thursday, let's do this, right? And so I think that keeping that kind of authenticity, that personal authenticity, is maybe our defense against chatbots talking to chatbots and losing that humanity there.
And I agree. I mean, I think now we're 5 years after sort of we really reinvented the workplace from due to pandemic restrictions, and I think what I am the process we're engaging in my lab is how do we reimagine sort of what work looks like with having some amount of in person for things where there's really a lot of value added, and how do we utilize tools like Zoom and things to do it when there's a clear benefit. And I think one of the things that we do in my lab is we do a lot of whiteboard sort of idea discussions. And I think that that's something where it becomes very clear if you've been entirely reliant on ChatGPT for your output that you will not succeed in the drawing on the whiteboard interface. And so I think of things of designing, being deliberate and designing places to leverage that human authenticity that Holly just mentioned and really showcase that and let people practice that skill and show that that's valued. And I think if you create incentives where that is valued as an independent skill, I think it will help make sure that yeah, that we're not solely giving in to having ChatGPT and chatbots just do all of our interactions.
It's all dead internet theory, right? Most of the internet's dead and it's just bots. I'm talking to bots now. It's a terrifying thought. Um, I think that about wraps up our time. So I want to thank you both again, Holly and Beth. Thank you so, so, so much for doing this. To everyone else, thank you for attending. Look forward to hearing back on your surveys and your views, and please tell us how we did and what you'd like to improve. Again, if you want a part of this, it's not the most hours in the world, but we do spend some time just to make sure that we can communicate what you guys want to our executive committee and the CTSA as a whole. So look out for potentially getting this position for future events like the one we're going to hold in the spring. And I can't thank you all enough for attending. Brittany, do you have anything else to add, or are we good to wrap up?
Nope, I think we're good. I just want to thank both the panelists and everybody for attending. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.